come into the future.
You know, Stephen, when they ask me who in the UFO community is really the most sane and knows what they're doing, I always mention your name. I mean, you're so logical, and you have done your homework, and you have been there, and it's not all hypothetical, and it's real. And I thank you as a researcher for being that goose at the head of the group of geese that are going towards this disclosure. But I want to tell you a story, typically Italian, that'll help you to understand, and you can use it. I give you my permission. When I was doing a lecture in Italy, the daughter of Marconi asked to speak to me, and she took me aside and said, "I have a lot to tell you." But before she could talk to me, she disappeared. I didn't know what happened. And the people who were with me said, "Well, you need to speak to Marconi's assistant, and his name is Pierluigi Igina, Igina. People want to look him up. He's a scientist, and he's up in Imola, and he's about 92 years old."
Wow.
So after a couple of months, I made my way up there, because this is what I do, all my books, and I've written for all witness testimony and all research that I do, my field research that I do on my own. And I went there, and as I walked into this huge studio, you could see he was an inventor. He had all kinds of things around. I saw on the wall these portraits of these beautiful people that looked like they came from India. They had these beautiful colored robes on. And I said to Mr. Igina, I said, "Did you go to India? Isn't that beautiful, this artwork?" And he turned around to me at 93 years old and said, "No, those are the Space Brothers. They're the ones that gave Marconi and I the ideas, and they're the ones that have contacted us."
Right.
And I looked at him and I said, "Are you kidding? You mean they're real people? You mean those are people that you've had contact with?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "Not only have they given scientists a download about evolving different technology," and I'm looking at Tesla here too, but
yes.
They have also met with us to tell us that we better watch what we do in the future. And Pierluigi, was a little bit, he was a little bit depressed, because I guess some of the prophecies he had gotten were not too positive.
Right.
And that was one of the greatest moments of my life. But this is very Marconi, generated, and I didn't know Marconi was subsidized by the Vatican. And I didn't know that he was involved in 1939 in several things. And 39 is way before even the Philadelphia experiment. So, if people do their research, they will start connecting the dots. That visitations, and I'm not talking about grays here that we're brainwashed to believe, but visitations of real extraterrestrial entities, people, light beings and so forth, have happened for eons.
Oh, yes. Yes, there's a wonderful, in the Uffizi Gallery in Italy, there's a wonderful portrait of the mother, Madonna and child, and there's a beam of light coming down to a group of people behind her left shoulder, and above there is a classic disc-shaped UFO with an opening in the center with this beam of light shining on this group of people in the background behind the Madonna and child, and this has been authenticated to the 1400s. And there's no question, we have never been alone, and we'll never be alone, that there's intelligent life out there, and they're wanting to see us evolve past this current period of enormous chaos and turmoil. And I have heard these sort of accounts about Tesla's experience, but let me just fast forward to the last few months. There are two different scientists we have worked with here in the last year or two with the OrionProject.org who have the highest clearances in the United States. And one of them has actually had these ETs materialize in his laboratory. And when he's doing an experiment and he's not on the right track, they actually move the instruments.
That's amazing.
Correct it. And this is someone with the highest security clearance. Another top secret scientist that I'm dealing with, a man who literally is at the level where he does briefings for Secretary of the Navy and the Vice President and people like this, actually had an extraterrestrial biological life form appear next to him and drew out on a piece of paper a form. I can't go too much into more detail. We hope to bring this out if we get funding to build a laboratory. But it's obviously a propulsion system. It's amazingly elegant and yet simple and complex all at the same time. And it's an energy and propulsion system drawn by an actual extraterrestrial that fully materialized beside this top secret scientist. And this is a man that I know extremely well. I've been in his laboratory. I've been in his headquarters in Washington. He's a very senior scientist. And yet, when he wanted to leave his position to work full-time with us, he was basically forbidden from doing so for another year or two. So these people who are in these sort of situations find themselves sort of clawed back by, as I call it, the beast. And yet there are these brilliant people who are having, even to this day, these sort of contact experiences, who are involved with CSETI.org and DisclosureProject.org. And so, when I talk to people in a public audience, if I get through 10% of this sort of information, it's probably a lot. And it's an amazing story, and we know that Tesla had experiences like this, and I understand that Walter Russell, who had sort of mentored the brilliant scientist Nikola Tesla, who invented AC, of course, electricity and radios and many other things, had similar experiences, and especially in higher states of consciousness. In fact, my home here in Virginia, I actually look up at the mountain west of here where Swannanoa is located, where Walter Russell had all of his gatherings. And so I live in an area where all of this was all coming forward, in the early part of the 20th century. And it's interesting because if you go back and do a sort of a study of this, you'll find that T. Townsend Brown was experimenting with high voltage electromagnetic fields where things were levitating in the late 1920s. And so there have been all these sort of technological breakthroughs for, when I say 100 years, literally over 100 years, trying to make its way through, I hate to say it, the greed and stupidity and the venality of mankind to benefit the earth and the average person. But there's so much power centered around the centralized oil, gas, coal, energy system, macroeconomic system, where everything is on a meter. And, of course, it's reported that J.P. Morgan famously said to Nikola Tesla when he was demonstrating his car that was running on free energy, that he said basically, if I can't put a meter on it and charge people for it, we don't want it, and it's never going to come out to the public. So this is the sort of thing that now, if you fast forward then to looking at the sort of leaps that Colonel Corso talked about with the reverse engineering of advanced extraterrestrial materiel that came from the electromagnetic warfare system that downed the craft at Roswell. And I want to be clear here, those craft did not crash accidentally. I have a document from the FBI, from a field agent, saying that they had a, quote, new type of radar installation. This is a euphemism for a scalar electromagnetic weapon that was switched on at Roswell that caused these two craft, and there were two of them, to collide, and one went down just to northwest of Roswell. The other one continued on a trajectory going westward and crashed near Socorro. And this is where you get a lot of people fighting because they have accounts from one place or another, and they don't realize there were actually two different craft that crashed at the same time, because they crashed into each other, because when this electromagnetic weapon system was switched on, it actually affected the electromagnetic propulsion and guidance system of these craft, and they had a mishap. But the materials that have come from that, and I have to say, I have multiple independent, at least 24 people who've worked on these sort of warfare systems. In fact, one man who had done a lot of work for Hughes Aerospace and a lot of the top defense contractors in the 50s and 60s, he told me that by 1965 we had these kind of electromagnetic weapon systems in space that were targeting extraterrestrial vehicles to, quote, kill them. And, in fact, when they would test some of them, he would see them go down off the coast of California into the ocean, and they would all be jumping up and down with glee that they had killed one. So there's this kind of electromagnetic madness that's been going on, and this is really an existential threat to the peace and the continued existence of the human race. And I remember back in the 90s when I told Mrs. Boutros-Ghali, the wife of the Secretary General, this, she just turned ashen. She says, "Oh my God, can that really be going on?" I said, "Yes, ma'am. These sort of electromagnetic discoveries have been going on for 100 years, and things like Montauk and other places. But unfortunately, we have a group of folks who are madmen, and who have seized this kind of information, and instead of it benefiting the world with free energy and clean energy and propulsion, they're using it to try to kind of do what Werner von Braun told one of our Disclosure Project witnesses, and that is eventually present to the world sort of a threat from outer space, so that they could then expand the whole military, industrial, financial complex into a global concern in some sort of interplanetary conflict and war. And this kind of madness and agenda is which involves trillions of dollars, literally trillions of dollars, is real, and that people have to understand that part of disclosure is knowing the truth about these things, but also knowing what the solution is. And the solution is creating peaceful contact with these civilizations, which is what we're doing with CSETI.org, disclosing this information in a very clear and organized way, and also trying to put together the people who have both the means financially but the scientific expertise to build these systems for peaceful energy generation. Because a lot of people say, well, should this technology even be known? I said, well, it is known, but it's in the hands of the worst possible element now. It's not benefiting the environment and the masses of humanity, and this is what has to change if we're really going to get off of the trajectory we're on now of basically cannibalizing the planet. And there really aren't any other viable solutions. To put a solar system on my house and make the house self-sufficient is about $125,000. And most people are not going to spend $125,000 to put solar on their house. Most people could never afford that. So from a realistic point of view, to get to the solutions we have to talk about these science and technologies and macroeconomic issues, which is one of the wonderful things of being able to sit with someone like Paul Hellyer, the former Minister of Defense of Canada, is that his specialty is macroeconomic systems and studies and the corruption that has gone along with the central bankers and that system. And he's a very astute thinker on this issue.
Well, I did an interview with him on my own dime, which I don't have very much of, in May, and he has written 2 books. The one, The Light at the End of the Tunnel, Survival Plans for the Human Species, which has ufology in it, UFOs, and he talks about the people he's talked to and what the conclusions are. And then the other one, which has to do with the banking system, with macroeconomics. And basically, he is very wise. But Stephen, it always shocks me because when you speak so logical. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out.
Exactly.
That this is real, and that if we want to change the order, that it must be done now, and these are the reasons for everything. And we're still, even in the, unfortunately, I'm going to say this, in the UFO community, we're back, at sighting stages and, square one, and people refuse to go anywhere here, and...
Right. Well, that's where they want it to be. See, they want it to be exactly where it was in the 50s and 60s and stay there. And this is why, what we've been doing, which have been these breakthrough events. We launched the whole worldwide disclosure movement, and now they're everywhere from New Zealand to Chile to Denmark are opening their files, everywhere but America. And what's interesting is that having worked with senior people in the French government and all these governments, what I found is that there really is a consensus to end the secrecy and bring this information out. However, there is this very powerful transnational secret group that a lot of people do not want to run afoul of because they end up getting threatened or they're afraid of its power. I remember even all the way back in the 90s, I was meeting with a cabinet-level minister over in Japan who had come to New York, and I was up in New York meeting with some folks, and And this man, we had this discussion, and I said, Japan could take a leading role because they were very, very favorably disposed to what we were recommending. He said, but they said, no, we cannot do this ahead of this group in the United States and Britain that are keeping this secret. So he was terrified at running afoul of these 8,000-pound gorillas, or not even 800-pound gorillas. And I think that this is the other thing, is that people have to find their voice and their courage to do this, and the average person can do a lot more than they realize, not only in terms of networking and educating other people, but also what we've been saying is that ultimately, if you look at Rupert Sheldrake's studies in morphogenic fields, things change when lots of people begin to do something